Welcome back to our history series, China's Past, Our Future. In this episode, we continue our journey into the Zhou Dynasty, an era that gave birth to some of the greatest ideas in human history. The Zhou Dynasty was not only a time of kings and warriors, but also the beginning of Chinese philosophy. Out of its rise and fall came visions of virtue, harmony, and justice that shaped Chinese civilization for more than 2,000 years. In today's video, we will explore 5 powerful themes from this remarkable age: the Zhou Dynasty and the Mandate of Heaven, how a single idea linked politics with morality and gave rulers their right to govern; the Age of Upheaval and Intellectual Awakening, how chaos and war opened the door to the 100 schools of thought; Confucius and the Path of Virtue, the story of a teacher who turned morality into the foundation of Chinese life; Daoism and the Harmony of Nature, the wisdom of Laozi, and the timeless lesson of living in balance with the Tao; the lasting legacy of Zhou philosophy, how these ideas outlived the dynasty itself and shaped Chinese culture for millennia together. These 5 keynotes will reveal how the Zhou Dynasty transformed conflict into wisdom, and how philosophy became China's greatest treasure. So, let us begin our exploration of the birth of Chinese philosophy under the Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty began around 1046 BCE, after the Zhou people defeated the Shang Dynasty. What made the Zhou rulers unique was not only their military victory, but also the powerful idea they introduced: the Mandate of Heaven. This was more than a political slogan, it was a philosophy that shaped Chinese governance for centuries. The Mandate of Heaven claimed that rulers were chosen by a divine force, but their right to rule was conditional. A king had to govern with justice, fairness, and wisdom. If he became corrupt, tyrannical, or ignored the needs of the people, heaven would withdraw its blessing. Natural disasters, famine, or rebellion were seen as signs that the mandate was lost. This concept had enormous consequences. First, it gave legitimacy to the Zhou when they replaced the Shang. Second, it placed moral responsibility on rulers, reminding them that power was not absolute, but a sacred trust. Finally, it gave the people a reason to question bad leadership, since a failing dynasty was believed to have lost heaven's support. In time, this idea influenced the rise of new philosophies: Confucianism, Daoism, and Legalism. Each drew from the belief that harmony and order came from aligning human society with higher principles. The Mandate of Heaven thus became the seedbed of Chinese philosophy. It connected politics with morality, kingship with responsibility, and history with a cycle of rise and fall. Every dynasty that followed, from the Han to the Qing, claimed the Mandate of Heaven, showing how powerful this Zhou idea remained. The mandate was not just theology. It was a moral contract between ruler and ruled, shaping the destiny of China for over 2,000 years. The Zhou Dynasty was one of the longest in Chinese history, lasting over 8 centuries. But time weakened its central authority. By the 8th century BCE, the Zhou kings no longer controlled all the territories directly. Instead, local lords fought for power, and China entered an age of division. This period is often divided into 2 phases: the Spring and Autumn period and the Warring States period. Despite its violence, this era gave birth to some of the greatest philosophical debates in human history. When societies face chaos, people naturally ask deeper questions. How can order be restored? What makes a ruler legitimate? How should humans live together? During this age of upheaval, Chinese scholars searched for answers. Hundreds of teachers, known as masters, traveled from state to state, offering advice to rulers or teaching groups of disciples. Their discussions became known as the 100 schools of thought. Some believed in restoring traditional rituals and morality. Others promoted harmony with nature. Still, others demanded strict laws and punishments. This was a golden age of ideas. Unlike other civilizations where philosophy often developed in temples or academies, Chinese philosophy grew out of practical problems of government and survival. War, poverty, and disorder created the urgency for wisdom. The Zhou chaos became the soil where Confucianism, Daoism, Mahism, and Legalism sprouted. It was China's version of Greece's classical age, but deeply rooted in Chinese realities. The thinkers of this period did not merely dream of abstract truth. They wrestled with human suffering, justice, and the need for peace. Out of bloodshed came brilliance, and the Zhou Age of turmoil became remembered as the intellectual awakening of China. One of the greatest figures to emerge during the Zhou decline was Confucius. Born in 551 BCE, he lived in a world plagued by warlords and injustice. But instead of seeking power, he turned to teaching and philosophy. Confucius believed society could only be saved through moral leadership and personal virtue. He taught that rulers must act as role models, leading not by force, but by righteousness. His key principle was Ren benevolence, or human-heartedness. A leader with Ren cared for his people as a father cares for his children. Another vital idea was ritual and proper conduct. By respecting traditions, ceremonies, and social roles, people created harmony. Confucius also stressed filial piety, the deep respect for parents and ancestors. For him, good government started at home. If families practiced love, respect, and duty, society would mirror those values. Unlike many teachers of his time, Confucius believed education should be open to all, not just nobles. Knowledge, he said, was the path to self-improvement and virtue. His teachings were collected by his disciples in the Analects, a text that became a moral guide for China. Though ignored by rulers in his lifetime, Confucius' vision later shaped Chinese education, politics, and family life for more than 2,000 years. His philosophy was practical, focusing on human behavior rather than the afterlife. He reminded people that wisdom begins with daily actions, respect for others, and devotion to the greater good. In an age of chaos, Confucius offered a path of virtue. His legacy became so powerful that later dynasties built their governments on his principles, making him the moral teacher of a nation. While Confucius turned to morality and social order, another great philosophy of the Zhou era sought wisdom in nature. This was Daoism, traditionally linked to Laozi, the mysterious sage said to have written the Tao Te Ching. Daoism taught that the universe follows the Tao, an invisible path or way that flows through all things. To live wisely, humans must align themselves with this natural order. Unlike Confucianism, which focused on duty and ritual, Daoism valued simplicity, humility, and freedom from worldly struggles. A Daoist ruler, instead of forcing laws, would govern gently, interfering as little as possible. Daoism encouraged meditation, self-cultivation, and acceptance of life's cycles: birth and death, growth and decline. It saw weakness as strength, softness as power, and stillness as wisdom. In times of war, Daoism was a philosophy of retreat and peace, reminding people that true balance comes not from control, but from harmony with nature. Its influence went far beyond politics. Daoist thought shaped Chinese medicine, martial arts, painting, and poetry. By observing rivers, mountains, and the stars, Daoists found patterns for human life. While Confucianism provided structure for society, Daoism offered spiritual freedom for the individual. The two philosophies balanced each other, one stressing responsibility, the other teaching flow and surrender. In the Zhou era, Daoism became the voice of those seeking peace within themselves, while the world outside burned with conflict. Its timeless wisdom that life is best lived in harmony with the Tao remains one of the most enduring gifts of Chinese thought. The Zhou Dynasty eventually weakened and fell, but its intellectual legacy never died. Out of its centuries of rule and periods of crisis came ideas that shaped the identity of China for millennia. Confucianism became the backbone of government and education. For nearly 2,000 years, civil service exams required mastery of Confucian classics. Daoism, on the other hand, shaped spirituality, art, and the understanding of health and the natural world. Legalism, though harsh, helped unify China under the Qin dynasty by insisting on strong laws and centralized power. Later, Buddhism from India entered China, but it did not replace Zhou philosophies, it blended with them. Together, these traditions created a uniquely Chinese worldview, balancing law with virtue, order with freedom, and humanity with nature. The mandate of heaven continued as a central idea, justifying the rise and fall of dynasties well into the 20th century. The Zhou period proved that times of crisis can produce wisdom as great as times of peace. Its thinkers turned war and suffering into lessons of morality, justice, and harmony. Even today, the teachings of Confucius and Laozi are studied around the world, influencing leadership, ethics, and self-cultivation. The Zhou Dynasty was more than a political chapter. It was the birthplace of Chinese philosophy. Its greatest gift was not its armies or rulers, but its ideas. Ideas that transcended time, guided civilizations, and still speak to us today about virtue, harmony, and the eternal search for wisdom.